I'm Jamie Champion. I'm Manager of Communications with AARP Florida. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. We want to welcome you to this special Q&A discussion regarding House Bill 485 and the personal care attendant issue that passed the Florida legislature this session and became Florida law at the end of June 2021. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan member organization, AARP has been working to promote the health and well-being of Americans for more than 60 years. So today I have the pleasure of hosting two guests, Jeff Johnson, State Director of AARP Florida, and Michael Phillips, Florida's long-term care ombudsman, to provide the latest information about this new law and how it may impact you and your loved ones. Additionally, we'll discuss the questions you should ask when considering long-term care as an option for yourself or a loved one. If you've joined us before on Zoom, you know this is like a live show where you can send us your questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring these questions throughout the event, and if we can answer them, we will. So let's get started. Our first guest is Jeff Johnson, AARP Florida State Director. Jeff, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me on, Jamie.
Can you give our viewers some background on the personal care attendant legislation and how this new law will impact families who have loved ones in long-term care, or perhaps they're considering long-term care in Florida?
Yeah, sure. So AARP has been working on long-term care quality issues for decades. And if you have a family member who's in a nursing home or an assisted living facility, I think one of the things you probably know just intuitively is that the quality of care that they get is really directly related to having well-trained staff who care about the residents and having enough staff for the number of residents who are there. So 20 years ago, there was a staffing law put in place in Florida that set a minimum staffing level for certified nursing assistants who are really the frontline caregivers for most facilities. And facilities have been trying to figure out how they can make those minimum staffing standards as best they can. Now, long before COVID, long before the pandemic, we heard from facilities that they were having trouble filling these jobs because while they're incredibly important, they don't pay very much. Frankly, many people who work as CNAs are doing it because they love this type of work, and they could be making as much if they were working even in a fast food restaurant. So the facilities have looked for ways to figure out how to make things a little more flexible on their end by providing for people who would count towards this minimum staffing standard who wouldn't necessarily go through the full certification process that a CNA goes through. And during the pandemic, as we saw, COVID hit nursing homes and assisted living facilities harder than just about anywhere in terms of cases and fatalities. And the governor in an executive order said, look, let's get as many hands as we can into these facilities and allow these personal care attendants to serve as kind of an addition to the CNA workforce. And the reality is, while the intent was to get more people in and perhaps to entice some of these people in this personal care attendant role to consider a career in long-term care as a CNA and moving up the nursing ladder, I think the reality is many facilities saw this as a chance to use even lower paid workers to fill gaps in their staffing patterns. And so coming out of last year and moving into the legislative session this year, we saw the nursing home industry push to make this personal care attendant program permanent. And they have. And from AARP's perspective, having a gateway, having a way to bring people into this career path and give them kind of an apprenticeship would be a valuable thing. Our concern is that the way the law is written, these personal care attendants who only have 8 to 16 hours of training are counted the same way that a certified nursing assistant who has 120 hours of training counts. And so when you think about who's taking care of your family member, you want to be sure that they are somebody who is well-trained and who is really committed to this. And I think for us, we just have a lot of concerns about the way this personal care attendant opens the door for some facilities to include people who they have really not been able to give that same level of training for. And that could reflect poorly on the care that your loved one gets.
Thank you, Jeff. Great insights. And that really describes the landscape, the lay of the land for us. And so next, I'd like to introduce Michael Phillips, Florida's long-term care ombudsman. Michael, thank you so much for being with us today. The mission of the Florida Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program is really to improve the quality of life for all Florida long-term care residents by advocating for and protecting their health, safety, welfare, and rights. And so, Michael, can you share with us your perspective on the role of your office and what your team does on a daily basis to improve the lives of long-term care residents and their families?
Thank you so much, Jamie, for inviting me to be with you and Jeff. The Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program was created under the Older Americans Act. Every state in the union, including the 3 territories, are required to have an ombudsman program. What was interesting is that when the Florida legislature brought us into an existence, I thought there's some interesting statements that they made that's in law. And let me just read this to you just briefly here. The legislature finds that conditions in long-term care facilities in the state are such that the rights, safety, and health and welfare of residents are not fully ensured by rules of the Department of Elder Affairs or the Agency for Health Administration or by the good faith of owners and operators of long-term care facilities. They went on to say that the legislature finds that the concerned citizens are often more effective for the rights of others than governmental agencies. And therefore, they created this volunteer-based organization that would assist in overseeing what goes on in long-term care facilities. Now we're talking a long-term care facility, I'm talking about nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and adult family care homes. And so our volunteers are trained in the regulations, but understand this, we're not regulators. That's not our role. That is not our function. We don't point that bony finger of guilt at someone and try to get them to comply with the regulations. But if they don't comply with the regulations, we're there, we can then refer that on to the Agency for Healthcare Administrations and other legal bodies to take care of the issues. We're problem solvers. If a resident has a problem in the facility, they come to us and share that problem. Our intent is to solve the problem. And sometimes we do it by pressuring on the regulations is what they're there. But we have currently right at 200 volunteers. In our heyday, we had 400 volunteers, but our average volunteer is 70.2 years of age. And of course, they're also in the high risk categories with the COVID. And so it has limited our work, but didn't change it. We still function, we still take cases, we still handle problems, but sometimes we have to do it by telephonic methods or so forth, and not necessarily in person. So but we've got a really dedicated group of ombudsmen that are out there attending to the needs of residents. And of course, we go into the facilities, and when we're in there, we're seeing things that's going on that we know that's not quite right. And so we will try to address that with administrator, trying to be persuasive, certainly cordial, but we are advocates for the resident, solely for the resident, not for the facility. We're not mediators. We intend to find a solution that's necessary to make the resident's life happier. And also, if we see things that are going on in the facility that's not right, quite right, we will address that with them. And I tell administrators, look, if I were sitting in your desk, I would want to know everything that went on that the ombudsman saw in my facility so I can correct it. Because sometimes we get very accustomed to things that are happening and not see it. And so we try to develop that relationship with the administrator, but we keep that distance there, that we are advocates for the resident. So family members can call us. We've even had staff and facilities give us a call and say, look, this is going on, can you help? And of course we will. So that's basically our role in function. We're there for the residents' rights and the residents' welfare.
Okay.
You see this gray hair up here? I started this job because I needed to make sure it was right before I get into the facility. So I have a personal interest in this as well.
Well, we appreciate your work and the work of your team. Can you tell us a little bit about where you stand on this new law regarding personal care attendants and what you specifically want families to know about this issue?
I'm concerned about it. You know, the whole program was set up prior to the pandemic. It was set up as an emergency basis for taking care of needs when the emergency occurred. You know, facilities are required to have so much emergency drinking water in the facility for emergencies. But when you start using that emergency water as your regular source of water, what are you going to do in an emergency? We have a system that allows for a workforce to come in and to assist during an emergency, but it was never intended to be a permanent thing. And as Jeff said, it really diminishes the quality of care merely because, and it's not an intended sort of thing. And please don't hear what I'm not saying, that these folks aren't dedicated, but they just don't have the life experience and the experience necessary to necessarily provide good care. The requirements were for 18 years of age. There's not a requirement of a high school. And so if you're 18 years of age and you just went through the 6th grade, you can qualify. Well, and I'm not trying to disparage. I know people have different life circumstances that created these sort of things. However, when you're looking at the care of your loved one, you want the best care possible. Is this the best care possible? I'm not sure that it is. Now, my background is higher ed administration, and as I was speaking, an accreditation that you have to go through. If I were to go through the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools accreditation and try to present this program to them with basically a 17% success rate, I would not get accredited. And let me share with you on that, because they touted at one time that there were 2,000 individuals who started this program back in March. And then in January, they reported that of those 2,000, 85% of those who challenged the exam passed the exam. Well, you would think that is a very fine success rate, 85%. But the truth of the matter is only 400 challenged the CNA exam. And so when you look at that, you've got of the 2,000, 1,660 washed out of the program. So what happened to those 1,600 that washed out? At what point in time did they say, this really isn't for me? And as Jeff mentioned, for $10 an hour, $15 an hour, it is easier flipping hamburgers than flipping grandma.
Yeah, and I did see advertised over the weekend that you can make $18 an hour as a school bus driver, versus,
sure.
So I think there are other careers, in play that just pay more and may offer better benefits, I think, which is a real interest right now, especially, I think, as we look at what's going on in healthcare.
I think you're right, Jamie. I really do. I think it's really important to see that. Here's my concern, though. At what point in time, because they can only do this for 4 months, at what point in time do they decide this isn't right for me? Now, how did that play out in the attitude in caring for this? Well, the call bell goes off in room 333. She is just a real pain. I'll wait. This isn't it for me. This isn't going to be my career. I'm just biding my time. Those things happen. And I'm not saying that is the standard, but we have to understand human nature and what's going to happen. And your loved one is there depending on this person to be at their peak, whatever that peak is. And so attitude comes into play here. When you got that high of a washout, that's a real big concern.
Well, and Michael, I think you make a really good point that in the CNA training program, because it's a little bit longer certification process, you hopefully find that threshold of whether this is a career for somebody or not before they get to the point where they're the primary caregiver for somebody. And I think if we knew that the way the program was being implemented in facilities was such that you had a PCA who was walking alongside with a CNA or who was supplementing the work of the folks who are there every day and who are frontline, then that would give you a little more comfort that if somebody, as you pointed out, said, you know what, this is not for me and I'm out of here, that they wouldn't be leaving residents without the care that they depend on for their health and livelihood.
But Jeff, also you brought up that point about being a workforce and adding to the workforce. And when you look at the program in totality, it is adding work on the current workforce that is not capable of handling the needs right now. They've admitted to that. So the training has to be done by a nurse. And so the nurse has to now dedicate this time to train these individuals that would be working alongside a CNA. So you got 2 people doing one job. Have you really increased your capabilities? I don't see that there's even a zero-sum gain on this. And also another thing to consider, especially for facilities, is that you do increase your liability by having staff that aren't sufficiently trained or may not be sufficiently trained. So it's a high risk factor, a low success rate. I don't think, and the legislature in their wisdom or lack of it decided to go ahead with the program. We are stuck with it, but we need to make sure that it is monitored and that the residents are duly cared for.
Yeah, those are all valid points. And I'd love to get to some questions from our audience because we have quite a few. So let's go there now. One of the ongoing issues with ALF and nursing homes is really the resistance that we've seen for workers at these facilities to get vaccinated for COVID-19. What do each of you think about that and kind of where we are now, what we're expecting to see with the new mandate that's coming down from, the Biden administration that would affect nursing homes that accept Medicare, Medicaid? Give us your thoughts.
I can
You.
say that, and Jamie knows this well because she's been helping us get the word out about the relatively poor vaccination rates among staff and residents in Florida nursing homes. I think we're second from the bottom in terms of staff vaccination rates, and I think we're still more than half of the people working in Florida nursing homes are not fully vaccinated, and that's a huge concern. So what we've said throughout has been, look, that is a concern, but it's not the same everywhere. There are facilities in Florida that have done a tremendous job of getting their staff vaccinated. And I think we have encouraged the industry to say, take your shining examples and learn from them. If the facilities that have just the teens percentage of their staff vaccinated can learn something from those who have 95% of their staff vaccinated, then maybe we would be able to get to a point where everybody is safe. It hasn't happened. And so AARP endorses and supports the effort by the White House and CMS to ensure that everybody who is working in these facilities is vaccinated, because this is so important. Again, COVID hit this population harder than anywhere else. About a third of the fatalities in Florida, the last I checked, were in long-term care facilities. Even that's a very small part of our population. It is by definition a very vulnerable population. And I think we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to take care of folks and not expose them to something that we know is potentially deadly. So we took a while to get to the point of saying that this mandate makes sense. But at this point, this many months into the vaccination process, I think it does make sense.
When the whole thing started with the COVID, there's so much that we didn't know. And so we were kind of flying blind and trying to do whatever we could to protect these residents. And we found that the vulnerability, as you mentioned, with this age group, was tremendous, and the death rate was horrible. And so the key was, how do we keep this nasty virus out of our facility? And so we were looking to ways to do that. Well, we know one good way is the vaccination, that it keeps us from even being, to transmit the virus, that if we can survive success, that is not that large of a threat, if you will, back to the Alpha variant. So we know that vaccinations help, and they will protect our residents. Vaccination of the residents and the vaccination of the workers. With our program, before we allow a volunteer to go into the program, we make sure that they go through a list because we cannot live with ourselves if we brought the virus that affected those that we're charged to help and to take care of. So I think the same principle should apply here as well. I'm all for the freedom of choice. And so if a staff member doesn't want to get vaccinated, that's their choice. But there's an ethical component to that choice if they want to continue working in a long-term care facility, because that resident in room 333 cannot go anywhere. That resident has no choice. And so if they're willing to risk themselves for the virus, that's on them, but they don't have the right to risk the resident. So I too support the mandate.
Great, good to know. So we've got one last question before we kind of shift and get into the questions that families should ask long-term care facilities. And from Glenn, he would like to know if AARP Florida rates nursing and other facilities in the state. If not, who does and where can he get that information?
Yeah, good question. And we do not. So ARP does not. However, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services has the Nursing Home Compare website that does a great job of doing a 1 to 5 star rating of facilities in a particular area. And the state of Florida, the Agency for Healthcare Administration, similarly does a rating system of nursing homes as well as evaluating assisted living facilities. And I think in both of those, if you go to the Agency for Healthcare Administration in Florida, or the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services nationally, you'll be able to find ratings that are pretty comprehensive. They're not just one measure, but they cover the gamut from resident satisfaction to staffing to other quality issues, infection control, those sorts of things. And on the state side, I know you can also access if there have been problems in past inspections of a facility, which can be really useful. It's not quite as intuitive as Yelp reviews, but it's pretty close. Having a 5 star rating system is a pretty good shorthand, and the fact that it is broken down a little bit more than just a one-off measure allows you to kind of look at what the strengths and weaknesses of a facility are based on the last time they were evaluated by those agencies. Well, the other thing I will say, and this, Jamie, I think leads to the next section you have, is that those ratings are only as good as the last time the evaluators were there. And I think that you as, especially if you're a family member who's looking for the potential facility for somebody you care about, really do have to do some of the due diligence of having conversations with administrators about what may have changed in their facility and what their strengths and weaknesses are.
Absolutely. No, those are great points. And so we want to continue the discussion and really talk through why it's so important for families to know and understand what questions they should ask if they're considering long-term care in Florida for themselves or a loved one. So let's explore some of those questions. Remember, you can find all of this information by visiting our website at aarp.org/FL. That's aarp.org/FL. And for those with a spouse, sibling, parent, or other loved one in a nursing home, AARP Florida strongly recommends that you ask your loved one's facility these key questions to help keep them safe, connected, and informed. So let's start with question number one, which would be, please tell me about your facility and why you think it could be a good fit for my loved one and my family. So as we know, Mike and Jeff, we see all different types of facilities throughout the state, and really the care that your loved one needs, it drives, what you're looking for in a facility. The location could be very important, but I think, from the outset, asking what they have to offer and what is there to meet your family's needs is super important. So question number two, we have obviously been talking a lot about personal care attendants and this new type of health worker. It's very important for you to ask if the facility uses PCAs, and if so, how are they being used and what is their role at the facility? Question number three, how many hours of nursing care will my loved one receive? And I'm going to put all of these questions in the chat. So for our attendees, feel free not to write them down. We're going to provide all of this to you. So on average, there are several different types of workers in these facilities, but CNAs, LPNs, PCAs, registered nurses, all of those. Ask for a breakdown of care and how your loved one will be interacting with these individuals on a daily basis.
Jamie, just real quick, I think those first three questions kind of all fit together really well, because if you're talking to the administrator of facility and their lead is really, we recently recarpeted or we have great food, that's kind of a warning sign to me. It's not that that's bad. It's certainly wonderful to have. But I think in terms of a nursing home, what you want is somebody who's is a facility that's focused on the care of the person that you're entrusting them with. And I think that the PCA issue, as well as how they break out the other staffing, is a really important litmus test. It's not perfect, but it does help indicate how they are approaching the care of your loved one. And I know that there are facilities out there that have decline to use PCAs because they, I think for some of the reasons Mike suggested, have found that it's more trouble than it's worth, and that it doesn't allow them to provide the level of care that they want. But I think it's also important to explore how often an RN is going to be around, or what the other caregivers are that are at play in a particular facility. And I know a lot of this will depend on your particular family member and what their needs are, but sometimes a facility that is especially strong at a particular type of therapy and has, you know, a certain therapist there is going to be more helpful to your family than one that has a strength somewhere else. I don't know, Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, you know, and you mentioned it earlier too, Jeff. The Agency for Healthcare Administration website is excellent in going to that and finding out what the certain functions and what type of languages are spoken there, the different types of care, the rehab, is it there? But you know, and I would say suggest do your homework, look at that first, go visit the facility, and then let your senses sort of take over as well. When you walk in the doors, the first smell you smell urine. You know, if it is, then somebody's not tending to something there. Look at the staff. Look for smiles on their face. Look for these micro expressions. Is this a happy group of workers? You know, look it over. The PCA. One of the concerns that I have with the PCA is if a family member goes into the facility, how will they distinguish between the CNA and the PCA? How will they know that this person really is not qualified to do what I think that they're doing to my loved one? So there needs to be some way to be able to identify these particular individuals. Um, and
You know, and Mike, I don't know if you've seen this much, because you're definitely deeper in this than I am, but I know just kind of from personal examples, what I've seen is that the facilities that really do this well are ones where their workforce tends to stay,
yeah.
where you have the same director of nursing for a long time, where, you know, the staff want to be there and they keep showing up. And I think one of the flaws in the PCA program is that it's a 4-month internship, if you will, apprenticeship, if you will, and that's good because they should be pursuing the CNA certification if they're going to be around longer than that. My fear, and maybe one of the red flags for families to look at, is if a facility is turning over, you know, 100% of their staff every 6 months or so, that's a warning sign. I mean, that's a problem that even if they have enough people showing up to meet quality standards, they've got a lot of people who really don't know the residents very well. They really don't know the facility very well. They're probably getting a lot of on-the-job training, and that's going to show up in the care of your loved one in a way that people who get to know your family member, you know, by name and know what their likes and dislikes are and kind of everybody's little foibles. Those folks, those team members are just vital in providing good care, I think.
You're so absolutely correct, Jeff. And it's one of the issues in nursing homes that to be looked at by even the regulatory bodies is what is the continuity of care of a resident. Can you imagine what that is like for a resident with dementia, that there's a new face every other hour, if you will? And this is one of the concerns back with the PCAs, is because in running through that program, there's going to be the constant turnover. They'll only do it for 4 months. And now you get another cadre of people trying to go in the PCA route. That is the continuity of care is an issue there. Truly it is. And I'm glad that you brought that up.
I think those are all wonderful points, and I think it segues into the last half of our questions. But before we do that, we have a couple of questions from our audience. We have a question from Carrie asking if we would consider PCAs as similar to home health or hospital type aides, and what best practices can be seen to ensure that guidelines are met and that proper care is given. And Jeff, I know that we've talked a lot about this, and Mike, you know this too, that the legislation is vague, and I think that when it comes to, you know, accountability or reporting, you know, of where these individuals are working in facilities and, you know, that their credentials have been obtained, I think that that's kind of a black hole for us. But I don't know if you would agree. Give us your thoughts.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that the lack of information about how PCAs are being used is critical, and it's part of one of the reasons why we're having this conversation, and unfortunately putting it on the family members to ask these questions, because it's data that's not out there. It's not collected by anybody. I do think, and I know it is a huge and confusing alphabet soup of certification, so it can be easy to jumble this stuff up. But it's just really important to remember that a PCA has currently 8 hours of training. In the law, it's going to be 16 hours of training. That's 2 days in a classroom. I would have a lot of problem trusting a family member who needed really significant care to somebody who just had 2 days in a classroom, unless they had somebody who was holding their hand all the way through this as they develop the skills that it takes to really provide critical care.
Absolutely. No,
You
I
know,
think
this
that's a great point.
that's so true. The proposed curriculum for this is actually about 12 categories, 40 subcategories, and this is to take place currently in 5 hours.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with 15 minutes on dementia, seriously, really? And how to handle behaviors. You know, you've got these young people, 18 years of old. They don't have all this life experience. You know, it's not a crime you can put them in jail for, but they don't have it. And so they're coming in and trying to deal with a resident that has dementia, doesn't understand what's going on, lashes out, calls them all sorts of derogatory names and so forth, just upsets their apple cart to no end. And how do they handle that? How can they be prepared for it with a 15-minute talk on dementia?
No, I think that that is so true. And right now, I know that was part of some legislation that we saw, during this past Florida session, was to address the lack of dementia-specific training available to workers inside these facilities. And I don't believe that that legislation was successful, unfortunately. And so. Let's move on to the next part of our questions that we're suggesting families ask. And so I've put everything in the chat for our listeners today. And so let's start where we left off. So when we're asking about staffing ratios, so what is the ratio of nursing staff to residents at your facility? And is the nursing home currently at full nursing staffing levels for nurses, aides, and other workers? So I think this addresses exactly what we were just talking about. You know, there is a worker shortage. And so knowing how that staff breaks down and who is there filling the shifts day to day. And that's, a big thing for families to be able to understand, and understanding the difference, as you said, who is trained to do what and what are their core responsibilities when it comes to the care of your loved one. And so understanding the care plan, what is the plan to make sure that, direct nursing care is provided to my loved one, and how much time and attention will they get each day? I think that's very important for families to understand. And like we said, what are the roles and duties of those who are providing that direct care? So if a family has asked all of these questions, how can they be assured by a nursing facility that this is actually happening? And so how would that nursing facility communicate updates and information to residents and loved ones? I know that myself, having my father in a long-term care facility, we would get emailed updates. Most of the time it was electronic communication directly to family members, but there are a lot of ways that facilities can choose to do that. But I think ensuring that it is happening, or that it will happen if your loved one is needing something, is very important. We discussed this a little bit about the hesitancy of workers to become vaccinated in facilities, and we've got a couple audience questions that I'd like to get to, but I think understanding what the status is of COVID-19 vaccination inside the facilities of residents and staff. And that is information that's widely available online from the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services for nursing homes. Assisted living facilities in Florida, Jeff, we know that's a different story. And vaccination data is not currently available for those types of facilities. And I believe we just have a couple more questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So I think in that same vein, it's very important to understand who has tested positive in the last couple of weeks. Has there been an outbreak at the facility of COVID-19? You want to make sure that you cover those points, especially if you're considering, putting your loved one into this facility or considering it for yourself. Understanding how staff are cleaning and protecting and providing PPE, all of those things. And then, because we know isolation has been such an issue during the pandemic, I think finally question number 10 is, how can I ensure that my loved one won't become further isolated, and how can I keep in contact? Which staff members will update me and allow me to connect with them if I'm not allowed to go into the facility to see them or visit them? And how can we FaceTime? How can we utilize technology to make that happen? So
Yeah, Jamie, on that last point, and I think earlier you talked about communication with families too, and it just seems before COVID, it was the eyes and ears of family members that provided that extra layer of contact with family. Of course, it really helps the residents in their mental and emotional health to see people that they know and that they love and that they're comfortable with, but also for Mike and the ombudsman, they tended to be the first line who would, it'd be a daughter or a son who says, hey, there's something at this facility I'm not quite sure is right. Can you come check it out? And I know that for the safety of residents, there have been long stretches where facilities have said, yeah, we can't have anybody in right now because we need to protect them from COVID, which we agree with. That said, it does require the facility to do a little bit more to try to communicate with family about what really is going on. And you talked about FaceTime, and I think while for a lot of long-term care residents and frankly their family members, the whole video chatting thing is a little different and weird and awkward, it has become something that is a real lifeline for folks. And it's not the same as being able to visit, but it is a really important way to check on somebody. I know families who have said that they were able to identify problems with the care of their loved one or with just how they were doing, whether the care was adequate or not, just that they seem to be struggling or declining or losing weight. Those are things that you can pick up on a video chat, and it's not the same as being able to be there in person, but sometimes it's the best we have. And so the facilities that have really gone above and beyond to try to make sure they keep those connections strong with family members, I think have really done great work, and we would hope that all facilities act like that.
Well, I would echo that to no end, because there's a responsibility for the facility to help the resident reach his highest practical physical, psychosocial well-beings. Now, it's a three-legged stool, and we paid attention very strongly to the physical with COVID, but we neglected these other aspects. And I think we've learned our lessons from that. Hopefully we have. I know a number of facilities out there that are just doing a tremendous job of making sure that their residents' psychosocial well-being is handled. Because we've had family members tell us that my loved one died, not from COVID, but from the depression and the isolation. And they moved into this failure to thrive syndrome and just gave up. We're social animals. We need that connection. And some of the facilities, as I said, did a tremendous job of going to the rooms, even though while they were isolated in the rooms, going to the rooms, having activities with them, and made sure that aspect of their life was being filled. In other facilities, and here staffing shortages, made that very difficult to do. The thing that I would say for family members, you really want to get engaged in the care plan of your loved one. Now, it's required in a nursing home every 90 days or as events change. Well, you can determine when events change. I really think we need to do a care plan, because I'm seeing my loved one becoming more depressed. Not eating as well. He's losing weight. Let's see if we can attack this. And therein is an interdisciplinary a group of folks. You'll be talking to the doctors, the DON, the different therapists that they may have, and so forth. The whole group get together and say, how can we make life better for your loved one in the next 90 days? If we see something, what kind of interventions do we need to take? So everybody's on the same game plan in order to make sure that your loved one just getting lost in the mix of the crowd.
Right. Well, I'd like to take one more audience question because we have had so many great comments, questions, and I think we've been able to answer almost all of them. So that's good news. We have one more from Alan. He wants to know, how often do ALFs and nursing homes change ownership? And is there a way to keep track of this so that families are informed about the current owner of the facility? Because he's saying that he's seeing a lot of corporate mergers and sales and purchases and things like that. So is there any advice that you would offer him?
Your ACA website, again, is an excellent source, because if you pull that up by the name of the facility, it will tell who the ownership is, and now who has controlling interest in that entity as well. And then you can go to the State Department Buzz,
Sunbiz. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I've
Uh,
gotcha. Sunbiz. Yeah,
Good.
you got
And,
it.
and go check on the corporation even further. And then sometimes you can take some of the individuals that are there through LinkedIn, and you can start doing the checkout. It's good to do, to look at that. And also, if they're under litigation or change of ownership, ACA's website will often tell you that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and Jamie, just on that, I mean, I think that if you have a family member who's in a facility and you hear that they've changed ownership, that's a really good reason to go in and talk with the administrator to find out how this is going to play out and what they know. And it may be something that plays out over time, and you need to check back in on it. I think anybody with a family member in long-term care knows this is a job. I mean, keeping up with what's going on in the facility is something that that family caregivers invest a lot of their time in, and it's really important. I did want to, and I'm sorry that I'm blowing your schedule, but there was one other question that I really wanted to make sure we hit on, and it was about what the hurricane plans are. And having watched what's happened in Louisiana over the last few weeks with the facilities that basically essentially warehouse their residents, I think it's really important for people to have that in mind as they're thinking about facilities here. They all should have emergency plans. They all should have either a generator on site or else have access to one, and their emergency plan should reflect where they are. If they're in low-lying territory where they're probably going to have to evacuate, then they need to be able to tell you what the plan is. And if they don't have a good answer, an answer that satisfies you, then that's a huge warning sign. I think it's a great question to raise. And again, just based on what we've seen in Louisiana, it's something that has happened here in the past, as we know too painfully well, and something that we hope will never happen again.
I think that's, that's a great point, Jeff. And to that point, for our attendees, we are hosting an event on the 15th, and asking Michael to come back and join us to discuss that specific issue and how nursing homes and assisted living facilities in Florida are required to prepare for hurricanes and for natural disasters. And so we'll be answering your questions about how you can make sure your loved one is okay when we are faced with a disaster striking Florida. As we know, we've had our fair share of hurricanes already this year. And so that'll be a wonderful event to attend. And you can check out our website, aarp.org/FL, for information about how to attend that if you're interested. So I'd love to thank our hosts for this great information that they provided to our audience, answering all these questions. And you've been wonderful attendees. So I'd like to wrap this up rather quickly, but remember, if you are concerned about the safety or well-being of a spouse, parent, or loved one who lives in a nursing home or long-term care facility, you can always contact the Florida Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program at 1-888-831-0404. We'll put all of this information in the chat for you. You can also contact the Florida Department of Children and Families Adult Protective Services hotline. Again, we'll put that number in the chat for you. And if you have a complaint against the facility itself, the Agency for Healthcare Administration is charged with the regulation of Florida's nursing homes and long-term care facilities, and we'll put their information in the chat as well. So again, thank you to our guests for taking the time to discuss this new law concerning personal care attendants and how it will impact Floridians and their families. If you or your family would like to share your experience in long-term care, we would love to speak with you. If you're willing to speak with media, please reach out to us through email at flaarp@ at aarp.org. That's FLAARP at aarp.org. We'll be happy to follow up with you, and we'll put that information in the chat as well for your convenience. So thank you everyone for joining us today for this edition of AARP's Advocacy Insight. Remember, this information will be shared on our website. We've recorded this session and it'll be available for your viewing pleasure on YouTube very soon. And again, visit us online at aarp.org/FL for more events to attend. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie and Jeff. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.